The first thing I noticed wasn't the alarms. It was the silence. A warship never truly falls quiet. Reactors hum, vents whisper, and the hull groans beneath acceleration. But today the silence came from the crew. Officers walked the corridors without speaking, staring at reports they already knew by heart. Another fleet destroyed. Another sector gone. Commander Hale, Captain Elena Ruiz stood waiting outside Tactical Command. Her expression told me everything before she spoke. The Galactic Council is requesting a human representative. That stopped me. For 40 years humanity had been little more than a junior member of the Assembly. The ancient civilizations considered us inexperienced and rarely asked our opinion on military affairs. They re-asking for us? I said, they re-asking for you. Minutes later our shuttle left Earth behind. The Council station appeared surrounded by battered warships, many barely holding formation. When the chamber doors opened, 48 civilizations turned toward me. For the first time since humanity reached the stars, they weren't looking down on us. They were looking for help. No one spoke as I crossed the chamber. The silence carried more weight than any argument. Around the circular hall sat ambassadors whose civilizations had ruled the stars before humanity had mastered bronze. Their robes, armor, and ceremonial crests spoke of thousands of years of uninterrupted history. Mine was a plain black naval uniform with no medals on display. Compared to them, I looked insignificant. The speaker inclined his head. Commander Hale, thank you for answering our request. I came because your message was marked priority black. It was. A projection bloomed above the center of the chamber. Hundreds of stars appeared, each representing a member system of the Assembly. One by one, crimson lights spread across the map like drops of blood in water. 31 colonies have fallen, the speaker said quietly. 8 fleets no longer exist. Every counteroffensive has failed. I watched the display without interrupting. The enemy? I asked. No confirmed origin. No negotiations? They do not answer transmissions. Prisoners? None. The room felt colder. One elderly delegate rose from his seat, his silver scales dulled with exhaustion. Humanity has little experience compared to us, Commander. Yet your species has repeatedly survived conflicts that should have destroyed it. We wish to understand how. It was an honest question. Not arrogance, not mockery, honest curiosity born from desperation. I folded my hands behind my back. You believe experience guarantees victory, I said. Humans learned something different. Several heads tilted. What did you learn? The speaker asked. I met his eyes. That surviving isn't about being the strongest. It's about preparing for the day. Strength isn't enough. The chamber fell silent again. This time, no one looked away. The speaker dismissed the attendants with a quiet gesture. Heavy doors sealed the chamber, leaving only the council members and me beneath the pale light of the holographic map. Whatever was about to be discussed was no longer meant for public record. A new image replaced the star chart. At first, it looked harmless. A single black object drifted between 2 dead worlds. It had no visible engines, no weapons, no markings. Then the recording accelerated. The object reached the first defense fleet. 300 warships opened fire. Nothing happened. Energy beams vanished before touching its surface. Missiles simply disappeared. Moments later, every ship stopped transmitting. Their reactors shut down one after another until the fleet drifted silently through space like abandoned wreckage. There were no survivors, the speaker said. The recording continued. A planetary fortress activated its shields and fired every weapon it possessed. The black object never changed course. It passed directly through the defensive perimeter. 32 seconds later, the fortress went dark. No explosion, no debris, just silence. I studied the footage twice before speaking. How many of these objects exist? The delegates exchanged uneasy glances. We have confirmed 74, one answered. Confirmed? We believe there are many more. I nodded slowly. That explained the panic. You expected me to tell you how to destroy them, I said. Can you? Another delegate asked. I don't know. Disappointment spread across the chamber. But I can tell you something else. Every eye returned to me. Your fleets were built to defeat civilizations. Your doctrines assume the enemy values territory, resources, or survival. I pointed toward the frozen image of the black object. This doesn't. The room became perfectly still. If your reports are accurate, I continued, then you, spent the last month fighting an opponent that isn't trying to win. I let the words settle. It's trying to erase. No one argued, because deep down, they had already reached the same conclusion. They had simply been waiting for someone else to say it aloud. The council expected me to offer a weapon. Instead, I asked for their archives. The request caught them off guard. Several delegates exchanged confused looks before the speaker finally nodded. Within seconds, thousands of combat reports appeared around the chamber, suspended as glowing columns of light. Fleet engagements, sensor logs, emergency transmissions, every failed attempt to stop the advancing darkness. I ignored the casualty reports. Numbers could wait, patterns could not. For nearly an hour I read in silence. No one interrupted me. The delegates watched as I moved from one report to the next, searching for something they had missed. Finally, I stopped. It never attacks randomly. A murmur spread through the chamber. The speaker leaned forward. Explain. It always destroys communication relays before orbital defenses. It eliminates logistics before command ships. Civilian evacuations are intercepted only after military response fleets have been committed. A tactical officer frowned. That's standard strategic doctrine. No, I replied. It's better than standard. I expanded another report. This colony lost power 12 minutes before the first contact. Another followed. This fleet received false navigation data 3 hours before the attack. Then another. And this station unknowingly transmitted enemy targeting information through its own emergency beacon. Silence returned. The enemy had not merely overwhelmed them. It had prepared them for defeat. Someone had spent weeks shaping every battlefield before the first shot was fired. I closed the final report. You, re-fighting 2 wars. Confusion spread across the delegates. The first is the one you can see. I pointed toward the projection of the black object. The second began long before it arrived. An elderly admiral slowly stood. You believe we've been infiltrated. I don't believe it, I answered. I know it. The words struck harder than any alarm. If I was right, every defeat had been inevitable from the beginning. Not because the enemy was stronger, because it had already learned how the council thought, and someone had taught it. No one challenged my conclusion. Not because they believed me, because every commander in that chamber had already asked themselves the same question in private. The speaker slowly dismissed the tactical display. Commander Hale, if our networks are compromised, how deep does it go? Deep enough that I wouldn't trust anything connected to them. The answer unsettled the room. One delegate immediately reached for his terminal before stopping halfway, his hand frozen above the controls. Others looked toward their advisors with open uncertainty, suddenly questioning every report that had reached them during the last month. An admiral broke the silence. We can isolate the military network. I shook my head. Too late. He frowned. You, assuming the enemy anticipated that. I am assuming it anticipated everything you've done so far. Another hologram appeared, displaying every major defeat in chronological order. Look at the timing. The delegates watched as I highlighted each engagement. You reinforced threatened sectors. Red markers appeared. The enemy attacked your logistics. More markers. You regrouped. Another line formed. It destroyed your fuel reserves. The pattern continued until the display resembled a chain wrapped around the Council's territory. It never reacted to your decisions. I looked around the chamber. It expected them. The realization spread slowly. Not panic. Something worse. Acceptance. The oldest strategist present lowered his head. We've been following our own doctrine. Exactly. Every civilization in the Assembly had studied the same academies, cited the same campaigns, and refined the same principles for thousands of years. They called it wisdom. An enemy studying those records would never need to predict individual commanders. It only needed to predict tradition. I stepped toward the center of the chamber. If you keep fighting the way they always fought, they already lost. The speaker folded his hands. And what would humanity do? I answered without hesitation. We would stop being predictable. For the first time since entering the chamber, I saw something change in their expressions. Hope had disappeared. In its place was something far more dangerous. They were ready to abandon 10,000 years of certainty. The chamber remained silent long after I finished speaking. Finally, the speaker looked toward the military delegation. If we abandon established doctrine, what remains? No one answered. For thousands of years the council had refined warfare into a science. Every maneuver had precedent. Every campaign followed principles tested across centuries. They believed experience was their greatest advantage. Now it had become their greatest weakness. I stepped toward the tactical display and erased every projected battle line. Gasps echoed through the chamber. "What are you doing?" an admiral demanded. "Removing assumptions." A blank star map floated before us. "The enemy expects your fleets to defend population centers." I marked several systems. "It expects you to reinforce failing fronts." More symbols appeared. "It expects orderly retreats, predictable logistics, and commanders who value preserving ships over risking them." The delegates watched the pattern emerge. "It knows your rules." I looked around the room. "So stop giving it rules." An elderly strategist frowned. "You suggest chaos?" "No. I selected a remote, insignificant system on the edge of assembly space. I suggest uncertainty." The system glowed. They spent a month reacting to every attack. Another symbol appeared far from the front. "What if you attack somewhere the enemy doesn't care about?" Confusion spread immediately. "It has no colonies," someone objected. "No industry," another added. "No tactical value." Exactly. The word echoed through the chamber. "If the enemy ignores it, they learned something." I highlighted another empty sector. "If it responds, they learned something even more valuable." The speaker narrowed his eyes. "A test. A question," I corrected. "Right now, answering every move the enemy makes. Start forcing it to answer yours." For the first time since the briefing began, the delegates stopped staring at the map. They were staring at me. Not because I had offered them victory. Because I had offered them something they had not possessed since the war began. The initiative. And sometimes, in war, asking the first unexpected question was far more dangerous than knowing the right answer. The proposal was approved within the hour. Not because the council believed it would work. Because every strategy they trusted had already failed. 3 reconnaissance groups were assembled from what remained of the surviving fleets. Against centuries of military tradition, they were sent away from the active war zone. No escorts, no defensive formations, no ceremonial declarations, just small task forces moving toward systems with no colonies, no shipyards, and no strategic importance. I watched the deployments from the operations gallery. No speeches were made. The crews understood they were becoming questions instead of soldiers. The first 2 groups reached their destinations without incident. The third never arrived. Its transponder disappeared exactly 17 minutes before entering an empty system nearly 400 light-years from the nearest inhabited world. The council declared it a navigation failure. I didn't zoom in, I said. The sensor technicians magnified the last transmission. Space looked empty. Too empty. There. I pointed to a slight distortion against the background stars. Several analysts frowned. I don't see anything. You aren't supposed to. The distortion vanished. Seconds later, the task force's signal ended. No explosion. No distress call. Only silence. The room grew colder. The enemy was waiting, I said. An admiral turned toward me. Waiting for what? There was nothing there. There was after we sent ships. Understanding spread across the command staff with frightening speed. The enemy hadn't defended valuable territory. It had defended observation posts. The empty systems weren't empty at all. They were listening stations, hidden eyes scattered across assembly space long before the invasion began. Every fleet movement, every reinforcement, every evacuation had been observed from positions no one had considered worth searching. The speaker closed his eyes. We never looked because there was nothing to protect. I nodded. And because you believed the enemy only cared about what you cared about. No one spoke again. For the first time since the war began, we hadn't discovered a weakness in the enemy. We had discovered the scale of its preparation. And that realization was infinitely more terrifying. The Council moved faster than I expected. Within 6 hours, every major fleet was ordered to halt. Long-range scanners were redirected away from the invasion front and toward the empty regions between inhabited systems. Thousands of sensor drones vanished into the darkness, each following unpredictable routes generated by quantum randomizers instead of military planning software. The ancient admirals hated every second of it. Randomness offended them. War, they insisted, was built on discipline. Human history had taught us that discipline without adaptation became ritual, and ritual eventually became weakness. The first reports arrived before dawn. 7 drones disappeared. 5 returned with nothing. The 8th transmitted a single frame before its signal died. I enlarged the image. At first glance it showed only empty space. Then the enhancement software isolated faint distortions scattered across the stars. Not one, hundreds. The chamber erupted into hurried conversations. The distortions formed a vast lattice stretching between systems like invisible threads across a web. Each object was almost impossible to detect unless a sensor passed within a few thousand kilometers. They've been here for years, one scientist whispered. I silently agreed. No invasion force could deploy this many observation platforms after the war began. They had been seated long before first contact, patiently watching trade routes, fleet exercises, and diplomatic traffic. The enemy had not invaded an unfamiliar galaxy. It had studied one. The speaker turned toward me. Can we destroy them? We can. He waited. But we shouldn't. Confusion spread again. If we eliminate them now, I explained, the enemy learns they discovered its eyes. I pointed at the expanding network. Instead, we feed them a lie. The room fell silent. For the first time, I continued. We know where they re-looking. A slow realization crossed every face. If we control what they see, they make decisions based on false information, the speaker finished. I nodded once. The war had reached a turning point. Not because we had become stronger. Because, at last, we had found a way to make the enemy believe something that wasn't true. The deception began before the enemy realized a game had started. Every fleet movement broadcast through the Council network was genuine, until the final transmission. At carefully chosen intervals, navigation updates were altered by isolated human systems that had never been connected to assembly infrastructure. The false orders were then allowed to travel naturally through the enemy's hidden observation network. Nothing dramatic. A convoy arriving 6 hours late. A patrol redirected toward an unimportant moon. A damaged cruiser reporting engine trouble that never existed. Each lie was small enough to be believed. The Council questioned the method. Wouldn't a larger deception produce greater results? One admiral asked. I shook my head. The biggest lies fail first. The speaker folded his hands. And the smallest? They become assumptions. 3 days passed. The enemy responded exactly as expected. Interception forces appeared where phantom convoys were supposedly traveling. Ambush fleets waited beside empty jump corridors. Entire strike groups abandoned active fronts to pursue ships that had never existed. The first confirmed mistake belonged to the enemy. The chamber fell silent as the tactical display updated. For the first time since the war began, an invasion fleet had arrived at the wrong destination. No battle followed, only empty space. They took the bait, someone whispered. No, I corrected quietly. They trusted their own intelligence. There was an important difference. An enemy could recover from a trap. Recovering from misplaced confidence was much harder. Fresh reports continued arriving throughout the day. Another hostile squadron diverted. Another surveillance cluster repositioned. Another attack delayed while non-existent targets were verified. None of these victories destroyed enemy ships. They destroyed certainty. I watched the crimson markers hesitate across the star map for the first time. The invasion had not slowed because we possessed superior weapons. It had slowed because someone, somewhere within the enemy command structure, had begun asking a dangerous question. What if the information was wrong? In war, doubt spreads faster than fear. And unlike fear, it cannot be defeated by courage alone. The discovery of the observation network changed nothing on the front. At least, that was what the enemy was meant to believe. Council fleets continued their measured withdrawals. Supply convoys followed familiar routes. Distress calls echoed across the assembly exactly as they had for weeks. Every movement appeared consistent with a civilization struggling to survive. Behind that carefully maintained picture, an entirely different war had begun. The hidden sensors remained untouched. Every false report they received was deliberate. Every intercepted transmission was written with the expectation that unseen listeners would read it first. The Council found the deception unsettling. "We are allowing the enemy to watch us," one delegate protested. I answered without looking away from the tactical display. "No." I highlighted hundreds of concealed surveillance points. "We, re-deciding what it watches." There was a difference, a profound one. For the first time since the invasion, the flow of information no longer belonged exclusively to the enemy. It belonged to whoever controlled certainty. Days passed. Enemy formations shifted according to the stories we invented. Entire strike groups abandoned critical sectors to intercept fleets that existed only inside carefully crafted reports. Supply interdictions targeted empty corridors. Ambushes waited for reinforcements that had departed in another direction days earlier. The Council celebrated each success. I didn't. The enemy was adapting, not blindly, methodically. Patterns emerged inside their reactions. They no longer trusted every report immediately. Confirmation forces appeared before major deployments. Reconnaissance elements began arriving ahead of attack groups. They, relearning, the speaker said quietly. They always were. Silence followed. The question, I continued, is whether they can learn faster than we can change. No one answered. Instead, another transmission appeared on the central display. It did not come from the front. It came from Earth. Only 6 words accompanied the encrypted authorization. Preparation complete. Awaiting political clearance. The council members exchanged uncertain glances. One admiral finally spoke. Preparation for what? I looked at the message for several seconds before locking the display. For the part of the war, I said calmly, that humanity hoped would never become necessary. No announcement was made. The council expected declarations, fleet mobilizations, and ceremonial authorizations before any major operation. Humanity requested none of them. Within hours of the political approval, hundreds of civilian freighters quietly disappeared from commercial registries. Cargo schedules were erased, shipping lanes closed without explanation. To the assembly, it appeared that human trade had simply stopped. It hadn't. Every vessel had received sealed orders years before the invasion began. No captain opened them until that moment. The speaker studied the growing list of vanished ships. Where are they going? I don't know. He stared at me. You don't I know their objectives. I don't know their routes. Confusion spread through the chamber. Our logistics never rely on a single plan, I explained. Every convoy chooses independently among thousands of prepared contingencies. Even if one is discovered, the rest remain untouched. The council officers exchanged uneasy looks. Their supply chains depended upon precision. Ours depended upon survival. 3 days later, the first reports arrived. Human transports were appearing across assembly space without warning. Not warships, repair vessels, fuel carriers, hospital ships, factory modules. Construction platforms. Entire mobile shipyards unfolded in dead systems the enemy considered strategically worthless. The Council archives contained no record of such infrastructure. How long would it take to build one? An engineer asked. I answered quietly. It wasn't built. He frowned. It was stored. Silence returned. Stored. Not for months. Not for years. For decades. Human industry had manufactured fleets that no one had ever seen because they had never been intended for peacetime. Every depot, every refinery, every fabrication platform had existed in darkness, maintained by automated systems waiting for a signal that humanity prayed would never arrive. Now they awakened. The strategic display changed for the first time since the war began. Red sectors continued advancing, but behind them, thousands of new blue logistics nodes appeared across the galaxy. The enemy had prepared for conquest. Humanity had prepared for endurance. Only then did the Council begin to understand that our greatest weapon had never been hidden aboard a battleship. It had been hidden inside our patience. The enemy noticed the change before the Council did. Its advance slowed, not because our fleets had become stronger, because every system it captured was already empty. Shipyards had vanished. Fuel reserves were gone. Manufacturing complexes had been dismantled weeks before the invasion reached them. The enemy was conquering territory. Human logistics had already conquered time. I stood beside the strategic display as another report arrived. Sector 41 evacuated. No casualties. No abandoned equipment. No emergency retreat. Everything that could move had moved. Everything that couldn't had been destroyed by its own operators hours before the enemy arrived. One of the Council admirals looked at me in disbelief. You burned your own infrastructure. No, I shook my head. We denied it to the enemy. There was a difference. The distinction mattered. For centuries the Assembly had fought to preserve every installation, every depot, every station. Human doctrine assumed that anything impossible to defend had already been lost. The speaker remained silent for a long moment. You planned for this. We planned for worse. That answer unsettled the chamber more than I intended. Fresh intelligence appeared across the display. Enemy fleets had begun pausing before every offensive. Reconnaissance elements multiplied. Supply columns lengthened. Assault formations waited for confirmations that never seemed sufficient. The deception had evolved into hesitation. The hesitation became delay. Delay became opportunity. Behind the front, human mobile shipyards continued expanding. Damaged Council vessels disappeared into hidden repair docks and returned days later fully restored. Ammunition stocks that should have been exhausted somehow increased. Entire defensive lines that had been expected to collapse instead grew stronger with every passing week. The Council searched for the source of the miracle. There wasn't T1. Only preparation. Only redundancy. Only thousands of plans written long before anyone believed they would ever be needed. At last the speaker spoke. We believed resilience was courage. I watched another convoy emerge from an uncharted jump corridor. No, I replied quietly. Resilience is planning for the day courage isn't enough. No one challenged the statement. By then, every survivor in the chamber understood the same unsettling truth. Humanity had never expected peace to last forever. It had merely hoped it would. The first human fleet entered the war without ceremony. No broadcasts announced its arrival. No diplomatic statement preceded its deployment. The Council learned it had crossed the border only because enemy formations began disappearing from the tactical display. Not destroyed, disconnected. Entire invasion groups suddenly ceased transmitting. Long-range sensors found no debris fields, no expanding clouds of wreckage, no emergency beacons. Only silence. The speaker looked toward me. What weapon does your fleet use? I answered truthfully. The same ones everyone else does. He frowned. Then why are the results different? Because we aren't fighting their fleets. I enlarged the operational map. Every vanished enemy formation had shared one feature. Each protected a logistics junction. Each guarded a command relay. Each secured a transportation corridor. We, re-fighting their ability to continue the war. The realization spread slowly. The Assembly had spent weeks confronting enemy battleships. Humanity ignored them. Fuel depots disappeared. Relay stations went dark. Supply convoys never reached the front. Repair docks stopped answering. Within days, entire invasion sectors began reporting ammunition shortages. Not because their factories had been destroyed, because nothing could reach them. The enemy finally reacted. Massive strike groups abandoned the front and turned toward the human fleet. They arrived too late. Our ships had already moved. Not fleeing, relocating according to plans written years before the invasion. Every pursuit ended where we no longer were. Every ambush found empty space. The council watched the recordings in disbelief. One admiral whispered, "They, refusing decisive battle." "No," I corrected. "We, refusing unnecessary battle." Another report appeared. An entire enemy offensive had halted without a single engagement. Its commanders requested fuel. None arrived. For the first time since the war began, the Crimson advance on the strategic map stopped moving. Not because humanity had won a great victory, because the enemy had discovered a truth every human commander accepted from the beginning. An army does not die when its soldiers fall. It dies when nothing reaches them. As the chamber fell silent once more, I understood that history would remember this day incorrectly. They would say the human fleet defeated the invasion. In reality, we had defeated its certainty that tomorrow would arrive exactly as planned. The war ended without a final battle. Enemy fleets withdrew beyond the edge of known space, abandoning worlds they could no longer sustain. No treaty was signed. No surrender was received. One day the attacks simply stopped. The council declared victory. I never did. We had survived because humanity had prepared for a war no one believed would come. The enemy had prepared just as carefully. Next time, it would learn from us as we had learned from it. Before returning to Earth, the speaker asked one final question. "Commander, who truly saved the galaxy?" I looked through the viewport at the silent stars. No one. We merely ensured it lived long enough to face another tomorrow. Years later, the Assembly rewrote its military doctrine. Ancient traditions remained, but beside them stood a single human principle. Hope is never a strategy. Preparation is. That sentence outlived every commander who had spoken it. So did the uneasy realization that humanity had never been the galaxy's youngest civilization. Only the one that had expected the worst the longest.